In the name of the living God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Exactly half of us here today are so incredibly lonely and empty inside. And the other half of us are very, very anxious or afraid or sad or angry about something or someone. And you know I'm right. Now, if you'll stick with me, this won't be the most depressing homily in the history of Christianity. In the last decade of the 20th century, the late, great British journalist Bernard Levin captured what I'm trying to say perfectly. He wrote these words, and I quote, "Countries like ours are full of people who have all the material comforts they desire, together with such non-material blessings as a happy family, and yet lead lives of quiet and at times noisy desperation, understanding nothing but the fact that there is a hole inside them, and however much food and drink they pour into it, however many motor cars and television sets they stuff it with, however many well-balanced children and loyal friends they parade around the edges of it, it aches." What part of your life aches? In 1959, Jackie Wilson is the one who sang, "My heart is crying lonely teardrops." Is it loneliness? Maybe you like Rod Stewart better. Do you remember that raspy? He's got that great raspy voice. "This old heart of mine been broke 1,000 times." Oh my gosh. And the tragic main characters in The Thunder Rolls by Garth Brooks. Do you remember that? It's 3:30 in the morning and she doesn't know where her husband is. So she's pacing by the telephone during a thunderstorm, and he finally pulls safely into the driveway. And Garth says she rushes out to hold him, thankful he's alive. But on the wind and rain, a strange new perfume blows. And the thunder rolls and the lightning strikes. Guilty, lonely, afraid, sad, ashamed. These aches are as old as humanity, I'm afraid. And that's because the Bible tells us after our parents ate the fruit, after they were so overtaken by the prospect of being absolute and independent and self-sufficient just like God, after that they instantly and tragically discovered it was a trap. It wasn't possible. And you remember, then they began to feel shame. And we learned they sensed they were naked. And then they even tried to hide from their loving Father. In many ways, the parable Jesus told during supper about a wedding party where everyone is jockeying for the best tables because they wanted to feel honorable and significant. In many ways, this is yet another retelling of what happened in the garden. How pride rises up and then it ensnarls us, and then by golly, then it even embarrasses us. You want a tragic, real-world, large-scale example of this? I'll give you one. I'll give you one on how pride goeth before the fall, to quote Proverbs. And it comes from a 2-hour documentary that I watched the other night about each and every radio signal Titanic sent from the moment she left Southampton until the bitter end, when she sent the last signal to Carpathia. I watched it, turned it on in the middle of the night because I thought it sounded like a real sleeper. But it was so fascinating right the way through. When Titanic left England, she was rightly the most optimistic ship ever to sail. She had the largest and latest array of onboard communications and navigation equipment known to mankind. She was considered, as you know, unsinkable. And the first messages she transmitted back to Southampton and the other ships around her position bragged about how well she handled, how she was the fastest ship, how comfy and warm it was on board, and how the first-class passengers were all somebody, all captains of industry, and how they enjoyed dancing and caviar and champagne. Even after they struck the iceberg, the communications initially remained confident and self-assured. The initial perspective of the crew, and I quote, "At 11:45 p.m., this cable struck an iceberg. She is doing fine. Fine voyage. Fine ship." Just after 1 a.m., when it was clear that Titanic's place of honor would become a low place indeed, the communications office began issuing desperate calls to ships nearby. Those messages were met with confusion and even disbelief. It was too late. The last signal at 1:45 a.m. was to the Carpathia, addressed personally to Captain Rostron, who'd been awakened by his own communications team. "Come as quickly as possible, old man. The engine room is filling up to the boilers." Jesus said, "All who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted." I suppose most preachers would stop talking now and trust motivated listeners to finally learn a lesson, to leave pride behind and sin no more. Unfortunately, through bitter personal experience, I know that won't work. And if I were to do that, it would only result in one of two equal but opposite errors. And they go like this. Indeed, if your prayers are answered and I sit down in the next 6 seconds, if that happens, half of us would walk out of here, having heard what I've said so far. We would walk out of here patting ourselves on the back and saying, from now on, I'm going to humbly give thanks to God for making me so successful and wonderful and self-sustaining and self-reliant and self-accomplished and so forth. You remember when Churchill was told that Clement Attlee was a humble man, you remember what he said. Well, no doubt he is, and Mr. Attlee has plenty to be humble about. Let us go forth into the world rejoicing that we are humble and darn proud of it. If I stop here, the rest of us, the other half of us, will leave convicted and distraught over our sin and the sin of pride. And we'll have a deep, almost admirable determination, a steely determination to do better, to perfect our faith and morality before sundown. And this would go swimmingly and seemingly well until we all go to brunch and maybe you have a Bloody Mary and you call your husband by your old boyfriend's name in a terrible Freudian slip that just tells him that he's not the one. And this excruciating faux pas would serve as yet one more reminder of our inability to self-cure. Our inability to self-cure the aches and blunders of life. The end of this little homily, the end of this parable, lies in discovering a bigger God than self. If you look at the world, you'll be distressed. If you look within, you'll be depressed. But if you look to Jesus, you'll find love, peace, and a transformative hope in the middle of aches and shame. The preacher's job, if I may be so humble to say, the preacher's job is always to let the final word be the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ. The truth of God's declarative and restorative power beyond our merit and striving. A good friend told me recently about a lady in her 90s whose children recently discovered their mother's newly acquired 2 a.m. habit of watching QVC and then dialing up on the phone, yes, and buying all the blenders and air fryers. And when they confronted Mom about this, about why she was doing this and why she was spending way too much of her money, more than she could afford, she told them, I guess it's because I'm lonely, and I guess it's because they make me feel special, because they call me by my name. No matter who you are, and no matter if you fancy yourself in the high place of honor today, or if shame has placed you in a low place, no matter how high or low you are, in your own eyes or in anyone else's, the first and final word over your life from God is this: I see you. I love you. You are special to me. Friend, come up higher.